Good day to all of you students. Now, yesterday I had begun with the first quatrain of the sonnet When I Have Fears by John Keats. Now, to do a quick recap, the first stanza talked about, or the first quatrain, uh, the first couple of lines talked about Keats's fears and worries about dying before he could turn all his thoughts in his mind into poetry, or before he could fill piles or stacks of books with these thoughts in the same way that a farmer would fill his storehouses with harvested grain. Now, Keats was a person whose preference was always for a life of sensations rather than of thoughts. And in much of his works, Keats emphasized more upon the physical, the sensory, and the emotional, and did not focus much on rational thought. But this sonnet, When I Have Fears that I May Cease to Be, however, explores the writer's fear of early death, something that Keats himself experienced because he died at a very young age of 24 of tuberculosis. The poem or the sonnet develops the speaker's preoccupation with physical aliveness, and he accepts that he cannot attain his literary and romantic ambitions, but this process of thinking is sufficient for him. So, the first quatrain describes the reason for the speaker's fear of death, how it would cut short his efforts to leave a mark on the world by collecting his thoughts and committing or putting them down into writing. Now, one very important thing that you need to remember is that he uses the plural word of fear, that is, fears, and this indicates that his fear or dread is multifaceted, that there are many fears, and it also highlights his lack of control over whatever he is afraid of, that is, death. And in the next three lines, we see that Keats does not want to die before collecting his thoughts. So, the first of these is when he says, My pen has gleaned my teeming brain. So, according to this image, the speaker wants to harvest the ideas from his mind like grain from a field. Now, this metaphor implies that the speaker's thoughts are very valuable and they must take time to mature before he can record them. In addition, as well as this comparison in using the word teeming, highlights his preoccupation with the physical aliveness and his longing to continue to experience life, and in which he sees such life even in his thoughts, as if his thoughts were like growing plants. So, teeming over here means fertile, describing in a way the brain's production of thoughts. So, he was very convinced of his talent. He was very convinced that he was capable of producing some very impressive and wonderful work of art. Keats goes on to describe the high piled books. High piled books means there are so many thoughts in his mind that he could produce and write a number of books which would hold his ideas, written in charactery. Charactery means something that would express his thoughts if he does not die before he fills them up. And in the line where he uses the word hold, suggests the permanence of the written ideas and the fleeting quality of those unwritten thoughts which would otherwise disappear after the speaker's death, and he would not be able to leave a lasting mark. So he wants to hold them, he wants to harvest them, he wants to put them in books before he can die. So the line forms a simile which compares books to rich garners, and through a metaphor likens the speaker's thoughts to full ripened grain. So there is a connection through the rhyme of brain and grain. This reflects the intensification of feeling, as well as it completes the speaker's or the poet's purpose as a writer if he is able to record his thoughts, in a way highlighting his desperation to continue living. In the second quatrain, this escalates and the writer becomes more aware of the possibility that he will not have the chance to out of live out a fate of love and glory. And this was a broader reason for him to fear death. So, in the first two lines of the second quatrain, the speaker seems to behold upon the night sky a glorious fate foretold to him. It reveals the speaker's emotional reaction there is a sense of awe, and there is a personification where the night's starred face, that is, the personification of the night sky, which is usually presented as a backdrop or a background. It brings out the speaker's focus on aliveness and also brings to mind or helps us to recall the romantic poet's belief that all of nature contains a spirit. So, in the next line, the speaker refers to huge cloudy symbols of a high romance that predict his future. Now, cloudy describes both literal crowds and the lack of clarity regarding what exactly the symbols are or represents high romance. He is, that is, Keats is very much aware of the probability that his early death will prevent him from living this fate. So, over here, what the poet is trying to say, or these lines denote, is the ardor and the warmth of feeling in a love affair by the use of the word romance, which reveals again the poet's potential future. So, the speaker or the poet fears being unable to look upon his beautiful beloved, and no longer, the fear is of no longer being able to enjoy that power of love. So, when the speaker considers these fears, he feels isolated, as if he is standing all alone on a vast seashore. In such moments, the speaker feels as if love and fame do not matter, or perhaps are impossible in the face of death.